This is the brief version of a presentation on using the sociological perspectives or paradigms to explain the family in society. The three paradigms we're going to address are functionalism, conflict theory, and interactionist theories. Let's start with functionalism, which is also called the structural functional theory. And this theory explains society as a series of social structures, and each of those social structures performs a function to help keep society stable. One of these social structures is the institution of the family. The government, religion, the education system, the healthcare system, and the family are all examples of institutions that together collectively make up society. A social structure, by definition, is a collection of statuses and roles that are interrelated. So in the case of the family, for example, we could think of the role of father, the role of the mother, the role that's assigned to children as being related to each other. I am a father because I have children or a child. I am a mother because I have a child. I'm a husband because I have a wife. I'm a wife because I have a husband. So they're interrelated, and they make up this unit that we call the family. And when we talk about the family at the macro level, we're not talking about in any individual family, but we're talking about the family as an institution in the broader society. Now, when we talk about functions, what we mean is the function of any institution are those things that institution does to help keep the society stable. Examples of the functions provided by the family include the socialization of children, sexual regulation, and also connected with that, procreation, and providing emotional support for the members of the family. And we could also add here providing economic support for the members of the family as a family unit. So the functionalist model is based on the assumption that society is made up of social structures that each contribute functionally to the stability of society as a whole. When all the social structures are performing their functions effectively, then society runs smoothly and there aren't many problems. And so functionalists don't expect a lot of major changes to occur in the system if it's running smoothly. If they are not performing their functions adequately, then there may be a dysfunction, and the dysfunction might cause instability in the society. So if the family is dysfunctional, for example, if there's child abuse going on, that might, and that is a pattern throughout society with a lot of people, not just one case, then that would be a dysfunction, and that would certainly cause instability in the family unit, and it would also then ripple out to cause instability in society as a whole. In contrast to that, conflict theory expects change. Conflict theory assumes that conflict or competition is a natural part of society and social relationships. So conflict theory takes the view that society is based on competition over scarce resources. This competition generally manifests itself in struggles between dominant groups and social groups. So when you think of conflict theory, don't really think of the word conflict, think of the word competition, because it's just about different groups within society competing for wealth, power, and prestige. Change, then, is just the outcome, the natural outcome of the competition that goes on between groups. And you can see that in society very easily. You can see this in politics, with the different political parties vying for who's going to have more power. And that changes when one gains more power, then changes happen, and then the change might happen again as the struggle continues. we could operationalize the dominant and subordinate groups as men versus women, because traditionally and historically in our society, there has been inequality between men and women, and men have had the advantage when it comes to opportunities to acquire wealth, power, prestige, control, authority, and so on. One way that the conflict model might explain the family would be to look at those inequalities and examine how our norms about marriage and family structure, and the roles of men and women support the status quo of inequality. Frederick Engels claimed that the family, the basic unit in a capitalist society, serves as the chief means of oppressing women. To him, the husband represented the bourgeoisie and the wife represented the proletariat. In other words, men are the dominant group and women are the subordinate group. The struggle or conflict between these groups happens if and when the subordinate group gains class consciousness. That means that they realize that they are not merely individuals who have bad luck, but instead they are a whole category of people, such as the category of women, who are being exploited by another whole category of people. Therefore, conflict theory is useful to explain the women's movement. Just 100 years ago, women did not have the right to vote. They couldn't manage their own money without the signature of a man, such as a father or husband. It wasn't until the mid 1970s that a woman could access a line of credit independently without a man to co-sign her application. So the women's movement emerged as a group and they demanded equal rights under the law. Conflict theory is useful to help explain that change that happened as a result of the women's movement and also the struggle that brought it about. Another insight that you might have if you employ the conflict theory to explain the family would be that the patterns of homogamy and endogamy impact the distribution of wealth over time within the society. Now, endogamy and homogamy, what that means is that people tend to marry others that are in their same social class and their same race. So people that have similar social and personal characteristics to themselves. And that wouldn't matter, except that inheritance is a way in which families pass on the wealth to the next generation. And more than half of the wealth that is acquired by people in the higher classes, than the upper class and the super rich, is acquired through inheritance. So if the super rich and the other classes practice endogamy and homogamy, they're only going to marry people within their same social class, and that whole chunk of wealth will be passed down only to people who were already in that class from generation to generation. So that's the way that, those norms of marriage impact the distribution of wealth. Now, this brings us to interactionism or the interactionist theories. And while functionalism and conflict theory were macro level theories that examined society at the societal level as an institution within the society, the interactionist theories examine society at the micro level. And these theories give us a chance to explore things like the communication between husbands and wives, parents and children, and so on. People use social interaction to create the social world, and they give meaning to behaviors and to objects. Think about, for example, the meaning that's attached to a wedding ring. That's an object, or to the wedding ceremony. So social reality is socially created. Let's look at just a couple of interactionist theories and think about how you might apply them to understand the family or relationships within the family. It's easy to see how the Thomas theorem and self-fulfilling prophecy could have application to family life. The Thomas theorem says if things are perceived as real, they're real in their consequences. A good example of both the Thomas theorem and self-fulfilling prophecy at work is the experimental study done by Rosenthal and Jacobson, where they went into schools and they tested children with a sort of standardized test, and then they randomly selected 20% of the children and put their names on a list. And they went to the teachers and they told them, we've given the children this test. Our test tells us that the children on this list are intellectual bloomers. They are on the threshold of a huge jump in their abilities. So in reality, the children on the list were statistically scored the same as the 80% who were not on the list. But the teachers didn't know that. So Rosenthal and Jacobson went away for 9 months and came back at the end of the school year and tested the children again. This time, when they tested them and compared the scores between the 80% and the 20% who had been labeled as intellectual bloomers, both groups improved from the beginning of the year, but the 20% that had been labeled scored significantly higher than the 80% who had not been labeled. And the only difference was the expectations that the teacher had for those students. So subconsciously, when the teacher expected students on that list to perform better, the teacher may have taught them more inadvertently, and they did perform better. They responded to the teacher's expectations. So the teacher's expectations are like a prophecy that the student stepped up and fulfilled. And it could work in reverse as well. There have been studies that have found that students do not learn well when their teachers believe that they're not very bright. There's numerous studies that have shown that. So how can interactionist theories help us to understand the family? First of all, they help us to look at the family at the micro level and to understand that the roles of family members and their patterns of behavior and the self-concept of individual family members are defined and redefined as a process of social interaction. Okay, here's another example of how we can apply the interactionist theories to a micro-level study of the family. We could look at communication in the family. So the interactionist theory says that family members act largely on the basis of how they interpret one another's actions. When you send a message, when you say something, you send a verbal message, but you also have body language. And the body language sends its own message. And the research has shown that when there's a disagreement between the meaning of the verbal message and the meaning of the visual body language message, that people tend to go with the body language message over the verbal. So for example, let's say a newlywed couple is having their first meal at home, and the young bride has gone to a lot of trouble to prepare a special dinner. So the young groom is eating it, but he's got a massive headache, and it's one of those that just happened, all of a sudden he has a sharp pain in the back of his eye, and so he takes a bite of the food. He has that sharp pain in the back of his eye out of nowhere, and then he has kind of a grimace on his face, right, because of the pain. And she says, "How do you like it?" And he's like, "This is amazing. It's delicious. I hope we have this more often." Well, she's going to interpret his grimace to be that he's maybe not being completely forthright about how much he likes the meal. So if you know that, you can be more effective in your communication. And that's a simple way that the interactionist theory, can be used. And actually, there's scientific studies that show whether or not people pay more attention to the verbal or the behaviors. I don't know if any of you have seen the show from the 1970s, an old show called Sanford and Son, but it's been a favorite of a lot of my students over the years, and it's the story of a 65-year-old junk dealer and his adult son. and the junk dealer is at home, and the son goes out and finds things that they can sell in their junk shop, and that's how they make their living. And their relationship is an interesting one. The father, Fred, loves the son, Lamont. There's no question about that. But he calls him dummy. He's constantly saying, "You big dummy," So, and Lamont is a high school dropout, and he is a person who has a lot of ambition. He wants to improve his life. So a lot of times in one of the episodes of the show, he'll go and take classes at night at the junior college, or he'll go and sign up for acting classes, or he'll go and try to start a business, or he'll date a woman and try to improve his life that way. And no matter what happens, Fred is always in the back of his mind, "You dummy, you big dummy," and undermines his confidence. And on every show, he usually, something happens where his effort to take acting lessons or what have you is not successful, and he winds up not leaving home, but staying home with Fred. And so the real motivation that Fred had of calling him dummy is, he doesn't want him to leave home. He wants to keep him there, and he loves him. He doesn't really think he's a dummy, but it has a huge impact subconsciously on Lamont's uh, self-confidence. So think about that in the family. Think about the impact that social interaction within the family has on a child's perception of reality, including the child's self-concept and, of course, the adoption of values. In this video, we have explored insights of functionalism, conflict theory, and interactionist theories to explain the family.
You big dummy.